Hi guys, I hope you're doing well and looking forward to Christmas since it's only 4 days away, and I had planned to make this video at least a week ago, but as always happens in December, time kind of runs away from you, so I'm sorry this is a little bit later than I would have hoped, but I'm going to be recommending a few books today that I think are perfect books to read on Christmas Eve or in the few days before Christmas, just if you think you need that extra push to get into the Christmas spirit. I have 4 books to mention. They're all fairly different, so hopefully there'll be something in here for everyone. But I also made a video a couple of weeks ago that was recommending books as Christmas gifts, but most of those didn't really have a festive theme because obviously typically you give a book that someone then reads after Christmas. But these are more ones to be read before Christmas. And I've noticed there's been a real uptake of the Icelandic tradition of jólabókaflóð, which is where books are read during the day and through the night on Christmas Day, and it's a really nice idea, and these are the kind of books that if you want to do something like that and give a gift to your family member on Christmas Eve for them to read during that day, I think it's a really nice thing to do. But equally, if you just want to treat yourself before Christmas, which is very much allowed, then these books are also great for that. And I think it's worth mentioning also that my personal taste in books is obviously going to be reflected in these choices. I don't really like particularly sentimental or cheesy books, so I've chosen ones that kind of stay away from that, so there won't be any sort of Hallmark style Christmas romance novels or anything, so if you are into those then maybe this isn't the video for you. First is a short collection of poetry by Wendy called Christmas Poems, and it's a really beautifully produced book by Faber, who are great at this kind of thing, with lovely illustrations inside. It is very short, it probably only has around 10 poems in it, so it is a quick read, but it's actually very modern in the style of poetry that it contains, and it has poems that range from telling about the more positive sides to Christmas, but also some slightly more melancholy poems as well. It's a really nice blend of heartwarming and witty, poignant and incisive poems in this collection, and it's not at all overly stuffy or sentimental that I feel like a lot of Christmas writing tends towards, so it was much more fresh than I anticipated it being actually when I picked it up from the library. There were a couple of poems that I really appreciated that delved more into the slightly more melancholy aspects of Christmas, which I know a lot of people don't really want to read about a few days before Christmas, but they were very interesting and they showed a side that you don't often read about in terms of the Christmas period. Next is A Literary Christmas, an Anthology, which is a collection of poems and extracts from longer pieces of work, novels or diaries, that kind of thing, from some of the world's most recognisable authors through history. It's a slightly more educational read rather than being totally light-hearted, but I found it really fascinating if you want to sort of learn a bit more about the origins of Christmas and how it's been depicted in literature through time. It's divided into topics such as the Nativity, Christmas food, Christmas at war, and Christmas for children, that kind of thing. And it does really encompass a very wide range of topics and also authors. And of course, you know, styles as well. There are some that are much more witty and humorous, but then also a lot more traditional ones that are more highly religious. There are of course plenty titles that you'd expect, like Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and poems like 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, but then also some books that you've probably read, like Wuthering Heights, but that you maybe don't remember how it depicts Christmas, and then plenty as well that I really didn't know, weren't familiar to me at all. The extracts in here are generally from the 20th century or earlier, so most of them are much more traditional and a lot of them do have religious undertones. And although I'm not religious myself, I think it's really fascinating to read about things like the Nativity and to read about Christmas in a way that is quite different to how Christmas is depicted in the 21st century, which is obviously much more commercial. Many of these extracts are pretty short because the source material only mentions Christmas quite briefly, so for me it made it seem slightly choppy at points, so maybe not the best if you want to be fully immersed in the festive spirit, but I do think it was really good if you want a slightly more cultural festive experience. Christmas Days, 12 Stories and 12 Feasts for 12 Days by Jeanette Winterson is a book that I've been recommended quite a lot, but it's one that I only got around to reading this year and it really thoroughly surpassed my expectations. I particularly like the introduction, which tells the history of Christmas from the Nativity and the birth of Jesus to the origin of Santa. There are then 12 stories which I think absolutely exemplify Jeanette's genius, because they vary a lot from being joyful family tales to chilling horror stories, but they all have that element of realism that is sometimes missing from literature about Christmas. They feel much more relatable because they include discussions about the stresses of Christmas time, rather than being just entirely saccharine, which I think kind of a lot of Christmas material is. It just feels a lot more relatable because it doesn't make you feel guilty for not brimming with festive cheer at all times. I think a reason that I didn't read this book for so long is that it includes recipes, which I always thought would be quite jarring in between the stories, but they're actually not at all, because even the way she frames the recipes is incredibly lyrical, and it sort of fills you with that festive atmosphere, and it explains where the recipe comes from and a little bit about the background. And even if you have no intention of actually going away and cooking those recipes, you still feel that you've gained something from reading about it. And one of the stories that I particularly liked in this collection was The Mistletoe Bride, which is a retelling of a traditional folk tale about a bride who plays a game of hide and seek on her wedding night and shuts herself inside a chest in this large and spooky mansion that she lives in, of course, and discovers that she then cannot open the chest and escape, and is only found years later as a skeleton still wearing her white dress. And Jeanette Winterson does us quite a twist on this traditional story, which is really brilliant. But it actually reminded me of another book that I read a couple of years ago that I really enjoyed, which is The Mistletoe Bride and Other Stories by Kate Mosse. Here it's a collection of ghost stories written by Kate Mosse, including a retelling of The Mistletoe Bride, which again is quite different from Jeanette Winterson's version. But this is a really great book just for winter in general, because it's very chilling. The stories I found quite genuinely scary, which is really difficult, I think, in writing, especially when, you know, if you're someone who watches a lot of horror films and is quite hard to scare. But I can really understand if these kind of stories aren't what you're looking for on Christmas Eve, but it's something that I really enjoy reading, so I thought it would be worth mentioning as well. So those are my recommendations. I kept it to a fairly short curated list because there's really not much time before Christmas if you want to read some of these, but I hope that at least one of them piques your interest, and I hope that you have a very lovely Christmas, whatever you do, and I will see you at the beginning of the new year with my favourite books of 2018 video. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'll see you then. Okay, bye bye.